Call the Village of Riverside Board of Trustees regular meeting for Thursday, September 2nd, 2021, Room 4 of Riverside Township Hall. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clerk Haley, if you please call the roll.
President Valerie.
Here.
Trustee Pollock.
Here.
Trustee Marshowska.
Here.
Trustee Gallagher.
Here.
Trustee Hannan.
Here.
Trustee Evans.
Here.
Trustee Clarity.
Here.
Village Manager Francis.
Here.
Also present, Village Clerk Haley.
Thank you. Just need to get to the proclamation here, I'm sorry. Let's skip to the manager's report. Jessica, would you please, while I find the proclamation?
Certainly. I have a couple of items to report on this evening. The first item, I wanted to take an opportunity to congratulate the individuals that were sworn in to various supervisory roles within both the police and fire departments this evening. The ceremony took place outside prior to the village board meeting, and the following individuals participated in the ceremony with their family and friends. Director of Public Safety, Matt Buckley, Deputy Police Chief, Frank Lara, Police Commander, Leo Coder, Police Sergeant, Brian Greenwald, Deputy Fire Chief, Jim Mulligan, Fire Battalion Chief, Ray Williamson, Fire Battalion Chief, Dan Tadd. Another item that I wanted to make note of is residents, when they receive their water bills, it's important to note that there is a new remittance address for their bills. The village has set up a lockbox, and so the address in which the payments will go directly to our bank. And so if you do automatic payment through your banking account, through automatic clearinghouse, you don't need to worry about these changes because it'll automatically be deducted from your checking account or savings account, however you have it set up. However, if your bank actually issues checks, please make updates within your banking system. If we get a check still at the village hall, it will still be processed, whether it's via the Dropbox or residents coming in, and you can still continue to pay via e-check and online by credit card as well. So I wanted to make note of those items. Also, final item of note, and there will be a social media posting and an e-flash tomorrow, is the Swan Pond construction update. As I had mentioned previously, we would be doing weekly updates, providing pictures of progress and what is going on in Swan Pond. Construction began on August 28th. They are currently removing the south part of the path, and they've begun the riverbank stabilization with the limestone. And this same work will continue throughout next week as well. That is all I have this evening.
Thank you, Manager Francis. Back to the President's report. National Suicide Prevention and Action Month Proclamation. Hope for the Days 2021 National Suicide Prevention and Action Month Proclamation. Whereas September is known globally as Suicide Prevention Month, the National Suicide Prevention and Action Month Proclamation was created to raise the visibility of the mental health resources and suicide prevention services available in our community. The goal is to speak openly about the importance of mental health and the impacts of suicide to help remove the surrounding stigmas and to direct those in need to the appropriate services. Whereas suicidal thoughts can affect anyone regardless of age, gender, race, orientation, income level, religion, or background. And according to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, suicide is the 10th leading cause of death among adults and the second leading cause among individuals between the age of 10 and 34 in the U.S. And whereas more than 47,500 people died by suicide across the United States in 2019, which according to the CDC is one death occurred every 11 minutes. And whereas every suicide directly impacts a minimum of 100 individuals, including family, friends, coworkers, neighbors, community members. And whereas the Village of Riverside is no different than any other community across the country, but chooses to publicly place our full support behind local educators, mental health professionals, athletic coaches, law enforcement officers, and parents as partners in supporting our community and simply being available to one another. And whereas global organizations like Hope for the Day and NAMI Illinois are on the front lines of a war that still refuse to discuss, as suicide and mental health remain too uncomfortable to talk about. Whereas I encourage all residents to take the time to understand the importance of mental health education and recognize that taking care of ourselves and others include taking care of mental health. And now therefore be it resolved that I, Joseph Ballerine, do hereby proclaim the month of September 2021 as National Suicide Prevention and Action Month in the Village of Riverside. Thank you. Suicide affects us all, and it probably has touched everyone's life. Riverside does have resources, so be aware. Talk to your family, talk to your neighbors, talk to your children. If need be, please contact our police or the township, and they can put you into the right place. Thank you. Next is resident comments for non-agenda items. I believe we have a gentleman in the hallway that would like to speak. Please, sir, if you just give us your name.
William Searcher.
Thank you.
Okay. I have a building on Lincoln, and I was out of town for the meetings before. Been in Riverside for over 40 years. We went through 3 floods over there, and I understand there's a project going on or supposed to start to put sewers in over there. Does anybody know? And I don't know what's going on with it, and I was trying to find out what's going on, if there is a project going on, or if it's going to start, or I called a couple of sewer companies, and they want $30,000 to put flood controls in. And I heard that there's a project, I believe I heard that there's a project that's going on. Can anybody tell me what
Well,
it is?
over in that area, there's the Groveland levee, which we've been working with the Army Corps of Engineers and the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, and that's an ongoing project. We do have other projects that we will be coming through the Stewart facility study, which you can get off of online, and the other main project we're doing is splitting the sewers and the Olmsted watershed. But in your particular area, your area is more impacted by the flood wall, and we're continually working with the Army Corps and MWRD to get that project moving.
Does that include the sewers out in front of the buildings on Lincoln?
That'll include some sewer work as the project gets underway. It will take some engineering as the project gets worked out.
No idea when it's going to happen.
We're on the federal government's time frame, so they should have done some work for us 2 months ago. So we'll keep you posted.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. For the consent agenda, approve the voucher list of bills September 2nd, 2021. Approve the Village Board of Trustees regular meeting minutes August 19th, 2021. Motion to approve a special event application for the Parks and Recreation Department's walk-through haunted house. And a resolution authorizing the village manager to approve a change order for the, not to exceed the amount of $22.50 for the increase of costs of steel and permitting fees related to the installation of a communication tower at the Public Works facility. Do any of these items need to be removed? Okay. Hearing none, I would ask for a motion and a second, please.
Motion made.
Motion by Trustee Gallagher, second.
Second.
Second by Trustee Marszałka. Ms. Haley, please call the roll.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Trustee Marszałka.
Aye.
Trustee Gallagher.
Aye.
Trustee Hannan.
Aye.
Trustee Evans.
Aye.
Trustee Clarity.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Board and commission reports. Is there any reports tonight? Okay. We have no pending business. New business. Discussion of economic incentives for a new business. Assistant Manager Ashley Monroe.
Well, hello and good evening. I'll start by just quickly summarizing an item that was included in the packet for the board. You know, in general, economic development is important for the village of Riverside. It's been a priority over the last several years, and in prior years, the board has supported rebates specifically for places of eating and rebates of sales tax to particular businesses, some that would enhance additional opportunities for sales tax revenue, for enhancing commercial properties, for filling vacant commercial property spaces, and generally enhancing the vitality and well-being of the business districts in our community. So in July, we were approached by MEV Riverside LLC about the property at 3300 South Harlem Avenue. You'll know the property as the prior site of Bank of America, and this property has been sitting vacant for approximately 2 years. I'm unaware of prior history of any interest in that particular property prior to my joining the village, but nevertheless, there's interest in putting in a 3,500 square foot standalone Sherwin-Williams paint store. The brand is probably familiar to people throughout the region, throughout the country perhaps, and there's a history of development of the same type of store in the Chicago region, and some even by this same developer. The purchase of the property, they entered into a contract to develop and acquire the property in August this year, and that includes the purchase of the building at 3300 South Harlem, as well as the .309 acre parking lot just south of East Burlington Street. So I'll also note that the properties are within one of the village's recently created business districts. So this means that it collects additional tax that can be applied only in that business district for capital improvement or other economic incentives within that business district. So the developer expressed some interest in relief in development costs and came to us with a proposal that's provided to you in your packet. A little bit, before we get into the financial summary, a little bit about the building. As I said, it was 3,500 square feet. The materials for that building would be required to fall within our standards for the zoning district, and they've selected a brick and stucco exterior. They would narrow the wider curb cut along Burlington Street that was prior used for the bank's drive-through, and that wouldn't be needed, so that curb cut would be narrowed. The curb cut along Harlem would stay approximately in the same location and the same width, the same distance from the intersection traffic signal. And then the elevation for what that building would look like as proposed was included in the packet, as well as the site plan. As for the financial summary, they have plan to construct approximately 1.86 million build-out, so that includes the demolition of the existing building, and then the construction of the new building. The building permits, fire review, plan review, inspections are all a collective fee anticipated to be about $40,000. There's a start for about $35,000, and then additional plan review is typically for a building this size, for a building of that construction value, is approximately $5,000. And so their proposal includes a relief of $40,000 for in-building permits and fees to be waived. The estimated sales tax for the Sherwin-Williams proposed development over a 10-year period were included in the packet. I think it's probably just after the memo. There's a table describing that sales tax revenue. They're asking for a share of the collected sales tax there. Currently, there's a 3% tax collected by the village in the business district. One of them is the non-home rule sales tax, which cannot be given away as an incentive. But the village has a 1% sales tax, and then there's an additional 1% for the business district. And of that, MEV Riverside LLC would be asking for 80% of that share over that 10-year period, and then the village would receive 20% in that period of time until $180,000 and their costs are recovered. And I'll just note that although the exhibit includes a revenue in that 10th year beyond $180,000, the village would receive the other unused portion once they hit $180,000. The village has given other tax incentives and rebates to other commercial entities in the last couple of years, namely Labara and Sawmilly received some incentives. And we have, any information that you need to fill in some questions you might have. We'll do our best to respond. We also have the developer, Kevin Vernick, here on the Zoom screen for you this evening. Wasn't able to be here in person, but nevertheless, we got him here so you can see each other and ask questions of him as needed. So I'll let you have a discussion or ask questions of the developer and respond as best we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, for being with us tonight.
Yes, for having me.
Can you hear us okay?
Yes, very
Okay.
well.
Anybody have any questions that they would like to?
I have
Please.
several. First of all, Kevin, thanks for looking at this project. It sounds like a spectacular project for the village. Just want to get an understanding on where things stand in the financing, what the timetable is on moving forward as far as ground-up development and demolition.
So my proposal is, depending on when you guys agree to an agreement in regards to the incentive, I'm working with Sherwin-Williams to finish a lease with them, and I've already got approval with Jessica and Ashley in regards to the elevations that fit per code as well as the site plan. And then the focus would be, after all that comes together, create building plans and hope that upon break of weather, we would break ground on the Sherwin-Williams.
And then, I guess this is a question, I'll start with Village Manager Francis. What are the conditions on the waiver of the permit fees? What happens if the development doesn't move forward?
How we've handled it in the past is that the developer would have to reimburse the village for those costs, and whether we pursue a collection route or what have you.
Will there be a timetable on when development has to start and finish?
We can include that as part of the agreement and stipulate it. I don't know when, and perhaps Mr. Vernick can tell us when their closing is scheduled for the property.
The plan would be to close end of the year, first of next year, and then again, break ground, break of weather.
I think that's, the two parties working together to get a reasonable schedule, but I think it'd be helpful to have some agreed upon timetable, so if the project does stall. The other question is, as far as the sales tax split, is that to this Sherwin-Williams, for example, if the store were to close and it was filled in with a replacement tenant, would that automatically apply, or would that tenant need to renegotiate to come in for a different package?
I'm comfortable if somebody, go ahead.
No, go right ahead.
No, go ahead, sorry.
In speaking with Attorney Mars, we would structure it that it would go with the current developer, and so that agreement would conclude. And then also, you have to meet certain requirements in order to enter into these incentive agreements. And so at that point in time, if there are individuals where you've already had a business in there and it has been occupied, it makes it much more difficult to do different incentive packages. So just be mindful of that. However, it doesn't necessarily preclude you from doing certain things as it relates to the business district incentives, because those monies that are derived through the business district reside through the business district.
Great.
So, but I just wanted to follow up on one item that Trustee Hannan said. I can work with Attorney Marsh to come up with a timetable for the agreement as it relates to, a range of time for breaking ground and when we expect to see the building being open and things of that sort, and when we anticipate sales tax being received. And we can go through that various process as a draft document for the board to review.
That's all the questions I have.
Anyone else?
So just to clarify, Jessica, are you saying that the tax benefit would be non-assignable should the party choose to cease operations or sublet the premises to another entity?
So how the agreement would work, so we can obviously write that into the agreement, but my understanding is the agreement and the rebate would reside with Mr. Vernick's firm. And so therefore, the rebate agreement and any other incentive agreement would die there should be a transfer of the property. Attorney Mars has stated that how he would structure the agreement is we would not only include the rebates, the different incentives, if we're looking at waivers, if the board should go down that path, and then also with regard to the transfer of the property for the parking lot. So it would all be incorporated in one agreement, and then any other caveats that the board would like to incorporate.
Thank you.
I think the clarification is the transfer of tenant, not necessarily transfer of property. What is the position of the village?
I think that's a decision for the village board. I think based on the high-level feedback I'm receiving is that the incentive agreement would be with your development company, but I will turn it over to the board for discussion. But
And I think
I prefer that as well. I'm just saying if, for instance, if Sherwin-Williams were to go away, then assuming I bring in another tenant that fits within the framework of the business, could I still get those sales tax dollars?
well, I think
that would have
that's
to
that's an interesting question, because also the other piece is, while they will be collecting regular sales tax and the business district tax, will there be an additional caveat if this is a restaurant space and it's places for eating tax? So it's really, I'm sure Attorney Mars, if the board is open to it, could structure it as such, but also being cognizant of the fact that I think the purpose of the incentive agreement is to not from from what I have heard and what we've been able to gather is other Sherwin-Williams stores in close proximity to Riverside have been, once they've opened, they've stayed open for a very long time. And so we would hope that this
Correct.
would be a long-term agreement beyond the 10 years, that Sherwin-Williams would stay beyond that.
Yes, that's the plan, 100%.
Because the Sherwin-Williams store in Berwyn is 25 years old, am I correct?
So we did a little bit of fact finding, and from what we could tell, it's been over 40 years.
Okay.
Well, those franchises do tend to have, a solid corporate backing and an established track record, which is why, one might be concerned about, transferring a benefit of this generous nature to an unknown entity and agreeing to that without knowing, with just too many variables. So I think
I get it.
I would be, I'm very encouraged, by the prospective tenant. I would advise caution with respect to just allowing free assignment of the agreement.
I would agree.
And I can work with Attorney Mars and also speak with Kevin with regard to that further.
Sure, no problem. We'll figure it out.
One additional item that actually Director Johns pointed to afford us maximum flexibility, my recommendation would be, while basically we're retaining 20% of the sales tax, we would recommend structuring it so that we're retaining 40% of the regular sales tax and then getting 100% of the business district tax. So instead of breaking it up where it's a split of just 80-20 for both of them, it would be structured slightly different, because then we can use the sales tax for a number of different things, whereas the business district tax resides only in the business district for investment and incentives.
That makes sense.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, Trustee Pollak.
A couple things. On the issue of the permit, waiving the permit fees or costs, would that be exclusive of any hard direct costs we incur, or does that include everything? In other words, will we be out of pocket permit costs to consultants, or are we just rebating above and beyond that?
So we would be out of costs related to consultants, because right now everything is contractual, because we're still in the process of looking for a building inspector. However, those costs as it relates to the rebate could be reimbursed through that business district as an eligible cost.
Okay. Well, that sounds like a viable option, something I'd want to look at. In terms of Trustee Hannon's comment regarding whether those fees, what happens if the development isn't finished or doesn't go through to fruition, they have to pay back those fees. If you're really concerned about that, I'm kind of neutral on this, but if you're really concerned about that, we could ask for payment up front and rebate that payment once the project is completed, if that's a concern. I could go either way with that, but as far as the economic incentive agreement, I certainly am all in favor of doing what we've done in the past with new businesses. I'm excited that this business is coming here. I think it'll be a good addition to the village. I'm not sure what to think about the numbers, whether those numbers are appropriate or too much or not, whatever. I want to compare it to what we've given other businesses, and I notice that staff has provided that information to us so we could take a look at that. And I'm wondering too, is this is a question for the developer, is this a gap where in order to make the project feasible, there's a gap where you can't finance and you need that help? Is that what's going on here?
Yes, that is. The cost of construction has gone through the roof, unfortunately, over the past couple of years, and actually the past 6 months. So costs have just gone up. Cost of the land is extremely expensive, and unfortunately, it's going to be filling a gap.
Is that something you could provide more information on to staff, so we have a better idea of how much we should be considering?
I think we have the number in front of us.
I provided a cost of construction in the proposal.
Okay, I think that might be helpful to help us land on a number, but as I said, just to
And
summarize.
that was in there already.
Okay, thank you. As I said, this is a great opportunity for the village, and I definitely want to make it happen. So just want to make sure we're on solid ground with what we decide in terms of future development and other businesses. Thank you.
Yeah. Can I have one more thing? The demolition of that big building is very expensive as well. So,
Trustee Evans, do you have?
Yeah, is the other Sherwin-Williams in Berwyn on Harlem? Isn't it down the street?
Yes.
So, do you have any concerns about the two shops being so close to each other?
no, that will go away.
Oh, the one down the street in Berwyn will close?
Yes.
And as you put together your sales, I would assume you base this off of the sales in Berwyn over the past years. Is this how conservative or how did you come across these numbers, these sales numbers?
These sales numbers are through the average stores throughout the area and how they typically do. There is some information, but not exact information from Berwyn. So this is purely a conservative look at what types of volumes that they do across the Chicagoland market and how it should progress.
Okay, thank you. Is there any way we can get the sales numbers from Berwyn?
No. They don't provide sales.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? So do we have a consensus for staff to do what they do and get us something to, on our agenda for the first week of October with the following questions that we had and directive?
Yes, is there any additional feedback? So the items I have is adjusting the sales tax distribution. We would maintain the max of the 180. We would look at what the waivers would be and incorporate that for the different fees. Also, I will work with Attorney Mars to address some of the reassignment concerns that came up this evening, and I will also work with Kevin as well. The only outstanding item is about this payment up front for the fees that we're looking to waive. Do we want to go down that path? That was kind of an open item or an item that Trustee Pollock brought up.
Is there any difference administratively as far as you're concerned?
Well, I would probably not necessarily, we would have to track it. We track deposits all the time. It's more of a question or a concern for the development themselves. If we're doing an incentive package to fill a gap, them coming up with this additional cash flow to put on deposit for us to turn around and then potentially refund.
Yeah, I just don't think that that's workable. I mean, from a developer point of view, cash is better put towards the development of the building as opposed to putting on deposit. I think, we've been through this before where if there is an amount owed and the project doesn't move forward, there's mechanisms for the village to collect that. So I don't think we'd want to put that, not a monster burden, but any sort of burden on the developer to move forward.
I agree. I don't see a compelling reason to work with a rebate instead of a waiver. This is an established brand. I think the risk of an abandonment of the project is low. So I appreciate the idea, but I'm comfortable with a waiver.
I will
Thank you,
work with
Colonel
Attorney, sorry.
Go ahead.
I will work with Attorney Marsh to craft something. We'll continue to communicate with the developer on this, and then we'll have it ready for board action then in October.
Great. Kevin, thank you. Is there any other questions you have for us?
Thank you. No, thank you very much. I look forward to working with the community. It's been great working with Ashley and Jessica, and look forward to continue to a successful project here very soon.
Good. Welcome to Riverside. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
The second thing on our new business is discussion of capital improvement plans. Director Johns. Thank you, Ashley.
We have a comment.
Sure, go ahead, Mr. Yates.
My name is Dale Yates. I have a property in Riverside, and the comment that I have here, I'm glad to see there's a welcoming of new business to come into Riverside. I think everybody's appreciative of that. It looks like we have two sets of entities here. We have the developer, and we have also the retailer, which would be, I understand, I'm limited on my knowledge of it, would be Sherwin-Williams. The cost that I'm talking about is there seems to be a moving forward on this, but I'm concerned about the overall cost of the village, about what we talk about consulting, engineering, all the other estimates and so forth that have to be put into a project like this, looking over the contract, legal costs and things like that to put this package together. I mean, we went through this whole thing here with another process that just ended over on Quincy, okay, well, there was a huge problem with all kinds of overruns and stuff like that. I'm concerned where the money's going for stuff like this when we're concerned more about, in my book, the safety and public health of the people in the village. And if we looked at what happened on TV, the last few days and the last night, what happened in New York, there's a huge, huge cry here for my money to be put into the systems of storm sewers and things like that. I'm just thinking the careful dollars are being expended on stuff that might not come true. So you do what you got to do here, but this is my take on it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Yates. Okay, Ms. Johns, walk us through this, please.
Good evening. Before you tonight is the 2022 to 2031 capital improvement plan for the Village of Riverside. We've been talking about this in phases or pieces for the last several months, and I'm excited to present to you the entire package tonight. Before we dive into the details, a couple of quick things that I wanted to mention is I'm estimating the assigned general fund balance projected to increase $125,000 at the end of fiscal year 2021 to approximately $668,985. We will have to make some sort of transfer to the capital fund for the projects presented later. Sorry, something messed up with my pages. I wanted to bring you through several of the tables presented before you tonight. The first table that I wanted to bring out is the facilities table. In the years past, we've been putting a unallotted amount of about sorry? Something made a noise. About $250,000 annually for repairs on municipal facilities. what staff is recommending is to use future limited tax debt issuance to address our facility needs. Starting with in 2022, a redesign of Village Hall offices, as well as some allotment for municipal repairs. The next time we're allowed to issue these limited tax debt would be 2023. So starting in 2024, we'd be making some large-scale improvements to come if this funding model is approved by the board. Any questions or comments on the facility portion of it?
Anybody? Yes.
Yeah,
Trustee Hannan?
is this, I know what we've talked about in the past is incurring new debt as old debt rolls off. Is that what this
Yes.
is intended to sync up with?
Historically, the limited tax debt has been used to fund public buildings. Most recently, our limited tax debt has been used to pay for our public works facility. We did last year issue limited tax debt to pay for Selborne Road because that couldn't wait until road funding. But yes, this will be rollover. This will be no additional debt to the system.
Okay, thank you.
Could you just maybe, for my education, explain a little bit about how costs for the Village Hall building are shared between the township and the village? Or allocated?
I might need a little bit of help from Manager Francis on this one, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine, and I may pull Director Tab in this as well. So we are responsible for our parts. So, for example, administrative offices, finance, community development, that is our piece that we are responsible for. So if something happens, that gets covered under our IRMA coverage. Also, police and fire department. So there are different additions that have occurred or different basement spaces that we have within the building. We are responsible. So any exterior work, roof, what have you, we take care of. Interestingly enough, while the building is the township, certain parts of it anyway, it's actually built on village property. So the parking lots on adjacent sides are owned by us and have to be maintained by us. So any damage or repairs that have to be incurred, whether it's over in the parking lot or the youth center or over here by finance and admin, is incurred by the village. So, but other common spaces within the township hall are maintained by the township, which include the second floor and the third floor, and then common spaces on the first floor along with their offices.
And the tuck pointing?
So, well, fun story.
Let's go deep.
And Director Tab, I'm sure, is ready for this chat. So we would be responsible for the tuck pointing that is on our part of the building. And the township would be responsible for their portions of the building. And I will actually turn it over to Director Tab, if you don't mind, because he has been having discussions with the township about coordination of that particular project.
So just, and I do want to hear that, but I want to understand the figure in 2024, the 187,000. That's for the village's portion of the tuck pointing?
That's a portion of the village's.
Okay.
So to kind of go back, the township had a facility study done, and they identified portions of the building that were deficient. Tuck pointing being one of them. Having spoke with them, I believe it's an architect that did the facility study. They have suggested that the roof and the gutters be done prior to the tuck pointing of the building. So, although we have obviously a portion that needs to be tuck pointed, we want to do it in conjunction with them because we don't want it to look different. We're kind of on their timeline when it comes to this. Through some kind of high-level discussions, once they get their roof and gutter situation resolved, we'll do the tuck pointing. It was projected for next year, but again, on their timeline. So while it's a placeholder, I can't tell you if it's going to come to fruition as of next year. But, you know, if they come to us, we want to be ready for it.
And the previous public director, Ed Bailey, did a lot of due diligence to make sure that we have the right mortar color, because obviously any mortar work that needs to be done has to go to preservation, and so we wanted to make sure, because I think in the past that there was some question as it relates to the color of the mortar that had been used previously, and so making sure that that was in alignment with what was previously done, and also that we get approval from preservation. So we've already done our due diligence on that piece, which the township will benefit from because we already have that information.
Understood. That's helpful. Thank you.
So if I, Director Tapp, so the way I understand it is the tuck pointing of this building is a shared expense between the village of Riverside and the township.
Right, we would pay our proportional share.
Okay. You talked about roof and gutters. Is that also a shared expense?
Our portion, we have a flat roof, so we would not, my understanding is we would not have to pay a proportional share of that, because for our office facility, we have a separate roof than the one on the township itself.
Okay, thank you. I have one other question on facilities, and that's the 900-pound gorilla in the youth center over there. You know, we've always talked about these grand plans of what could be done on that spot. You know, I think we need to right-size our expectations. I think we all want something over there. Is it feasible for us to get to have, you know, an architect or a consultant or somebody give us an idea what it would take to retrofit that building? You know, I've seen some, you know, great old buildings in the city that used to be, you know, cold storage or whatever, and now are, you know, $1 million condos. So there are bones over there that we can work with. You know, whether it can house a third floor, whether we can, you know, redo the rooms or whatever, what that would cost. I mean, we've talked about, you know, millions of dollars to tear it down and put a new space. We've never really talked about, is there something we can do with that space and design it where it is more continuous with the rest of the campus over here? Is there any feelings that we would, oh, that's some interest. Go ahead, Trustee Claire.
A question and some feelings. Has the village historically looked at partnerships with private entities or some sort of combined project to maximize that space on the river, share the funding, turn it into a retail or restaurant venue, some sort? Have we explored partnerships?
So we have not. There haven't been many of those types of partnerships in the Chicago metro area as it relates to village facilities. Probably the most recent one that both I and Assistant Village Manager Monroe are aware of was the Village of Mundelein. Had done this several years ago, where they worked to do that, and how the setup was that it was, if I recall correctly, half offices and then then half village-related offices and space. So that's not to say that the opportunity isn't out there, and if that's the direction that we want to head. I think the first step, if we are going to look at rehabbing that existing structure, is talking to Williams Architect, who did the facility review and study, because they already have a lot of that information, and saying, you know, we've changed kind of what we're looking at. We're looking at rehabbing the space, and so we need to know if we're going to look to build up, you know, can our existing structure sustain that, and what would we need to do to these different pieces? Because then once we know that piece, we can move to the next step of doing a request for information or a request for proposal as it relates to a development for a public-private partnership. But we've got to kind of hit a couple of these other checkpoints before we move on to that one. But I think it is a great opportunity. It's a great location on the river. We would just have to look at, you know, how much space do we have available? What do we want to do with that space? But that would be an opportunity to have that further discussion at an upcoming board meeting if we decide to engage Williams additionally to kind of do this fact-finding.
Understood. I'll just speak to the feedback that I've received from residents. I'm a new resident, and I happen to talk to a lot of new residents, and I know that this is an ongoing discussion historically in the village about this space, but what I'm hearing for new residents are, this is a wonderful space, it's right on the river, what can the village do to facilitate some growth here?
Trustee Evans?
Yeah, so just in reading the materials, it just says, you asked the question how this facility can be utilized to meet future staffing needs. So it sounds like staff might have a vision of what they want to use it for. I know that we use it for, do we still use it for training?
We use it for multiple things. Riverside TV has their offices, and while they make it work, it's inadequate at best. We have fire supervisors, because obviously Firehouse 1 can only, we only have a couple of offices in there. We have a number of supervisors, so they utilize space over in the youth center as well. There's vehicles that are parked, there's storage over there. They do both police and fire. And then also when village has any joint trainings, we utilize that space. And then additionally, there's workout space. So I think it's really having the discussion of we need to address some issues as it relates to public safety facilities. We've had these high-level discussions previously, and that's when Williams came in and designed something, and then the price tag was just too much. And so it's really looking at the public safety spaces and saying, how do we make all these different pieces work? Because the existing structures that we have in place, if we need to buy new equipment, some of that new equipment will not be able to fit, and that's a problem. And so we need to start figuring out ways to address this, even if it's phased, to have an understanding of what can be moved around. Maybe the workout space moves into the basement of where the police department is currently, and then we move the police out into the youth center after it's rehabbed. So this is a fluid discussion. We've never really had on the table of keeping and rehabbing the youth center, because a lot of the direction that staff has received previously is discussions about demoing it. So.
Yeah, because.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I just, because what you're describing, the way it's being used, it's not a youth center. So we shouldn't call it a youth center if it's not going to be a youth center. But whatever we do to the building, and it sounds like there are a great many needs for the space, we can also leverage the real estate so that the real estate overlooking the river, so that there is something for the community to have at the same time.
If we put on a third floor, yeah, for sure. We can have that. And some of us did go see Styx there in 1976. That's why it is the youth center, but that's okay.
Wow.
Trustee Hannon, I'm sorry.
I need a minute. I like the idea. My recollection, last time they did a facility study, was that there were systemic problems with the building itself that needed significant structural repair. So I think the first point is maybe to dig up that old study before and maybe get a summary of my understanding there's analysis, fix it or tear down, and there was a large analysis on all the things that needed to be done to make it rehabable. So I think that would be a good non-cost first step. But sort of the larger point I want to make, and this is previewing some of my comments when we were talking about roads and sewer and improvements, in my mind, with the rains that we saw, the rains that are no doubt coming, the sewer separation and working on flood control, I think has to be a first priority for how we spend dollars. Obviously, the astronomical costs of doing sewer separation, it can't be done all in 1 year. But, I think as far as spending village funds, I'd feel more comfortable dealing with the sewer and flooding issues with a view that youth center rehabilitation, that's something to get done, but this is the flooding is an immediate problem for the village that if there's a chance to fix it in the near term, let's do that.
So for water and sewer related improvements, those funds would have to come directly from the water and sewer fund because it's an
Okay.
enterprise fund. And so I believe Director Johns, based on some discussions that I had with board members in advance of the meeting, worked with our financial advisor to look at another potential scenario. Sorry, Karen, I know I'm jumping probably ahead for you.
It's okay. One of the ideas that was floated to me earlier this morning was the idea of taking the water sewer plan that's in the packet and trying to accelerate the timeline of it. So I worked with our financial advisors to issue $15 million worth of debt in 2023, which is everything that's included in that 10-year plan would be able to happen within a couple years. Before you tonight is a couple different repayment schedules of that $15 million. They've got the blue header at the top. I started with a 10-year repayment, did a 15-year repayment, and a 20-year repayment. What this takes into effect is really front-loading those projects. It doesn't address backfilling those projects in subsequent years. So we'd basically do 2 to 3 years of heavy water and sewer, and then almost have 10 years off if we don't want to do another large debt issuance. When we look at the 10, and just for ease of use, I calculated the amount of the infrastructure to pay the debt service of each one of these options. If we go with the 10-year option, that infrastructure fee would have to be $92.61. 15 years would be $60.11.
Okay, that's $92.60 every 2 months.
Every 2 months.
Okay, thank you.
For a 10-year plan.
Okay.
Sorry, the 15-year is 67 approximately, and the 10-year is approximately 56. So I guess I was looking for a direction from the board if they want me to kind of reevaluate this plan that we had previously discussed to front load it. Also, the street plan would also have to be affected as the street plan pays their proportionate share of the roads. So we would have to look at delaying those road projects that are in the first 2 to 3 years of the plan, which is Selborne Road and Riverside Road.
Well, I guess I was the one who raised the comment to Village Manager Francis regarding changing the timetable. And the catalyst of that was, we were pushing out certain long common corridor out to 2030, which seemed extraordinarily long given the flooding situations that are along that corridor. But, one thing that I've learned over the years is the benefit of layering in the debt, where we have, debt rolling off, debt rolling on. Is that what's already contemplated in the original plan?
Absolutely.
Okay, so what you've given to us today is just sort of a mass acceleration
Yes.
of everything, but that's not necessarily in reality what would happen, because obviously we can't tear up every street in the village for 5 years and not be able to get around. So it would be done in phases.
It would be done, it would have to be done in some sort of phases to make drivability happen.
And then as I understand it, there, obviously the coupling with the roads, resurfacing, and the sewer has to be done in sync to minimize costs and maximize the cost efficiency
Correct.
of doing that. So I guess I'm sorry to hijack the meeting, Mr. President. What I'd like to see is, that phased cost, because obviously one of the objectives here is we don't want to give anybody a $90 every 2 month hit. That's not feasible. That's not going to happen. But how can we phase this in, but, accelerate some of these timelines on the water and sewer separation? Again, I think we all recognize that for whatever reason, rains are becoming more intense, flooding is happening more frequently, and, not just with the levee that we've talked about, but, just further in from the river, we need to make that a closer priority to the extent that it's economically feasible.
We did, in the water sewer plan before you, that is a pretty phased approach. We can work at increasing it. As you remember, the original plan only called for one debt issuance in it. The board asked to accelerate to do a second one 5 years later, which we will have to make sure we offset with the appropriate amount of revenue to pay for that debt service. I guess, are you looking to you just want to do more sooner?
I'd like
Sorry,
something.
that wasn't very eloquent.
I'd like something between the bookends. You gave us an analysis that has the $15 million all in year one. You gave us the analysis with, phases going to 2031. Is there something in between that's feasible and doesn't put a tremendous economic burden on the residents?
And that also, I think the other thing is we need to tie it in with our street resurfacing also.
Right.
Correct.
So how much leeway do we have in this infrastructure improvement plan that dovetails with the street plan? I think that's the other.
Yeah, clearly.
The street plan is a little bit more contingent on timing, and that's where we based the next debt issuance. Actually, based on the previous conversation, I changed the previous board conversation wanted us to do a referendum tax levy instead of a debt issuance based on that conversation. So the plan for streets was spread out a little bit in those non-water sewer years. But that is pretty tied to that existing debt schedule so that the taxpayer will not be additionally burdened.
Okay. So to stay with the layering approach on the debt, this is what we have in front of us as being what's most feasible?
Yes.
Plan B.
Okay. That's helpful to know. Thank you.
Before we get too far, did we ever close up the thought of what we want to do with studying the facility other than we're going to re-bring up the Williams plan that they did a while ago and find out whether it's even a feasible option? And then I would assume we would put everybody in the room, police, fire, staff, to find out what's the best uses for the room. And I think we've also heard that if something's going to be done in that building, we want a residential component of some sort, whether it be a meeting room or some sort of, place where our residents can utilize also. Correct? Am I speaking? Trustee, you have something to say?
I was going to ask, wasn't there a video that was made of all the facilities when they did a facility study? I want to say 2016-ish.
It's 2018.
Right.
And I have it here.
Okay.
Along with the history, the architectural history of our facilities as well. So what I plan to do based on the board's discussion this evening is I will go through it with staff members and then we'll report back at the first meeting in October because that's when budget discussion will begin to get further direction from the board so that we can make some plans then moving into 2020 about different action items as it relates to facilities.
Okay,
Does that
thank you.
sound fair? Okay.
Thank you. Hey, Ms. Johns? Carry on.
Before we close the facility table, does the projects allocated for 2022 look in line with the discussion? It doesn't start any large projects because the debt issuance will not be there yet, but that would be a portion of the redesign of administration offices in this building, and it would be, $175,000 for general repairs. Right now, we're in the situation where if the roof leaks, we have to do significant repairs to it, HVAC units. That's kind of what those funds are allocated for at this point.
I think the plan for 2022, as far as it concerns facilities, looks fair and reasonable, given that any potential modifications to the current youth center space would be so significant and involve such an investment and thought required that addressing some immediate needs in this phased approach is reasonable.
Okay. I will move on to question number 3 in my issues to consider. If I could turn everyone's attention to the general CIP worksheet. The upcoming 10-year capital plan has a total of over $4 million in public safety vehicles, of which 2.7 million are what we are referring to as heavy-duty fire department vehicles. These vehicles, as you can see, some of them are over 20 years old, over 25 years old, and we need to draw attention to funding their replacements. Staff is recommending using American Rescue Plan surpluses to help pay for one of these large vehicles, but we will need both installments of the American Recovery Plan funds to be able to afford a new rescue pumper, which we currently have planned for 2023. That still does leave a large amount that needs to be funded for these vehicles long-term. The other option that staff wanted to bring up is the surplus currently being held at IRMA. We have over $1 million there. That would do us, those two pieces together would have, would help to solve this problem. Just so the board is aware, I have also reached out to Cook County, who is asking for somewhat turnkey projects for their ARPA funding. I've requested an ambulance and a fire truck from them and have yet to hear back, but I have asked.
Trustees, I got $750,000 for a truck. I mean, replacing these things, I mean, these machines, you know, as I look through your reports, they go out to 1 or 2%. I know they go out all the time. But I mean, you know, the repair costs to keep these things running would have to be pretty strong evidence in my mind, for us to drop $750,000 on a new machine. I mean, you know, kudos to your department. They all look like they're brand new. Yeah. So but I don't know what's under the hood. I know we spend, or we may spend, what, $50,000, $60,000 a year to keep these machines going? There's a lot of 50 and 60s and 750, but go ahead.
So yes, currently we do spend, I know we budget somewhere between $30,000 and $40,000 a year for repairs and maintenance to these vehicles. That number, you know, is, sometimes we use it all and we go way over. Sometimes, in the past years, we've never been under that number with repairs. And currently, as we speak, our ladder truck is at Public Works, and they had to pull out the radiator to repair the radiator, which was leaking. It's a very significant repair because the way these vehicles are built and the size of the radiator, it's been down for now about a week, and we anticipate it hopefully getting back tomorrow with the repairs being complete, but probably not till next week. So some of these repairs are getting pretty expensive when it comes to these vehicles. When that does happen, we look at the reliability. Having a radiator that will potentially fail us when the vehicle's in use is definitely a concern, which is why once we do have some of those types of issues with it, the sooner we can get it fixed and repaired, the better.
I'm absolutely sympathetic to the need, right? I trust you when you tell us this is what you need, and I think we want to provide you with that generally, but I agree with President Ballerine that just the sheer cost in light of the, you know, finances of the village is a little bit staggering. Mm-hmm. And so I query whether, are there other options? I mean, maybe if you could explain the other options that have been rejected. Is there a used fire truck market? You know, I'm not familiar with this, but what are there Band-Aid options? Is there something that's reasonable, safe, and fair that might be a middle ground here?
There are some used fire truck and vehicle companies that do that. They basically buy used equipment and resell it. Problem with that is sometimes you're taking on somebody else's headache or problem. So we try to avoid that as much as possible. We know what our vehicles have been through throughout their life. We don't know what some of these other vehicles have been through. So, you know, we're pretty cautious when it comes down to that, especially with some of the equipment we do have with our pumps especially. They're certified every year. So there's many different things that go with that to make sure that we have vehicles that when we do respond somewhere, they're gonna perform appropriately.
Trustee Evans, please.
And you need 2 pumpers.
Well, this is over the 10-year period of this. In fact, in my memo, you can see I asked for our newer engine to be replaced prior to the older engine. The reason why is when we bought that older engine, that was a custom-built engine specifically for Riverside for our needs here. They used stainless steel on everything. That's why you don't see rust on it. It cost more to build that one, but it definitely will hold up and last longer. The other engine is used, it's a little bit smaller. It's used on a daily basis. That's where you see the miles and hours are a lot more on that vehicle. That vehicle, when it was purchased, was not a custom vehicle. It was actually bought off the lot as a dealer demo vehicle. So it wasn't really designed for us. It was, we got a call from a dealer at the time, and it was a great deal back 2006, I believe it was. And that's when they took advantage of it and purchased that vehicle.
And then I know there's always been talk about whether we even have room for the new vehicles, whether we even have room for the new vehicles.
Yes, which is always an issue. Our ladder truck, when we purchased that one, we actually had to raise the level of the door at station number 2, and that's as high as that door can go because of the flex core roof that's on there. So that vehicle is, it was built custom for Riverside at that height, which is 11 foot 6 inches. Most other ladder trucks, they are now building some that are not custom that are built to that height, but it's, you know, that's pretty much as low as they come as far as a ladder truck. As far as the engines go, we can purchase one that would fit into our stations.
Does the ladder truck need to be replaced?
That one was purchased in 2001, and on the schedule, it is due in 2026.
Does any, We have a mutual aid agreement with North Riverside, Brookfield, right? I mean, how does that, you know, what's the, if there's a fire in Riverside and our pumper is at Public Works getting work done, what's the added delay time to respond to a fire in town?
So currently, we work auto aid with Lyons, McCook, and Forest View, where they come to Riverside with an engine. If our engine were down at Public Works for maintenance, we have a reserve engine, or the second engine would be then become frontline and be utilized for that. Relying on another town sometimes could be a flip of the coin. If they're busy in their own town comes first for them, and we would have to call in somebody else. So there could be a delay when we have major incidents going on, whether it be storms or other related type incidents like that. Pretty much everybody in our area is busy, so we then become self-sufficient where we have to take care of our own town on our own without the assistance of auto aid and mutual aid.
Thank you.
If I can.
Please.
At a different voice. You know, the price tag is a stunning number, but when I looked at the age of these vehicles and the use, and the fact that this is a, you know, 2023, 2024 expenditure, we do have some of the relief funds that will lessen the bite to the village on this. You know, among the things to look for cost cutting, you know, I do not like the idea of an aged pumper in need of repair, you know, being the line of defense on battling a fire in the village when it's health and safety. So I would, you know, it's not as if we're going out and getting the, you know, top of the line with all the bells and whistles and electronics. I'm assuming that the stereo system will be standard.
And to be honest with you, I don't want electronics on there.
Yeah,
I like
so-
having it as basic as possible.
I mean, I just think given the age of these vehicles, you know, if it's not going to be 23, 24, it's got to be someplace in that 10-year plan, you know, because eventually these vehicles run out of ability to be repaired.
How long should we expect, all things being equal, how long should we expect one of these vehicles to last? I understand it looks like you got the 2003 maybe in 2006, so that's, and it's already maybe at the end of its useful life for Riverside, that's 17 years. Is that what you would expect for these?
We look at about 20 years for a vehicle, but it depends on the vehicle. Our ladder truck, currently we have it on the schedule for 25 years. Could it get to 30? Absolutely. That's something that we would evaluate and explore when it got closer to that period or that time, if we could push it off a little bit to replace it.
I feel like we've had these conversations about fire department, the truck needs, like at least 3 times that I can remember in the past, maybe 5 years, 6 years. And so I don't know how many times we can have this conversation before we're really going to be in a tough spot with, you know, having to replace some of this aging equipment.
I don't disagree with you. I just want to make sure that the cost to maintain these vehicles is fundamental to whether they should be repaired. Just age does not mean something's not working. If it's properly maintained and things can last for a long time. Age is not that's just my these type of numbers just, you know, worry me, and then I see the amount of times that they go out, you know, with we don't have. You know, I had no problem with the ambulance, because our ambulance is out there, 14, 15, 16% of our calls. where our fire trucks are like 1 or 2% of our calls. So I just, that's where I'm coming from. When I read the great report that Mr. Buckley puts out to us every year, I look at those percentages, and I try to look at those percentages and then base it back on costs. But that's just my thoughts.
I have a question. Is there any resale value on the trucks that we have, the equipment that we have?
For the engine that we're looking to replace in '23, yes, there would be. Whether we do a trade-in or we sell it outright, we would look at that once we get closer to that point, because by then the hours and miles would be added up on it, as far as any other potential repairs that could be needed for that vehicle. So we would evaluate that once we got closer to that period.
But that offset's not reflected here.
No, it's not. It's a moving number. It's very difficult to determine what it's going to be. We could come out and say roundabout number, but when you really look at it, it's not a lot. So I was hoping it would be more, but once again, with the miles and the hours on the vehicle, it doesn't come out to be a lot of money.
Well, that
for
says
resale.
something if the used value of it is not deemed very high because of how used it is.
Yeah.
President Ballerine, if I may, would it be helpful for the board for Chief Buckley to kind of explain the equipment that is on these vehicles and when they go out and what they do? Because from my perspective, it was always very educational to understand how all those pieces kind of come together and then how it impacts the village's ISO rating and what that means to village residents as well.
Please.
So do you want to start with ISO ratings? So currently our ISO rating is a very good rating. We're ISO rated 2, which is pretty much unheard of for a paid-on-call part-time department like our department. That's based off of, big part is our water supply that we have in town, but it's also based off of our vehicles, our pumping capabilities or capacities due to the size of our structures and what we can actually pump out of the water mains through our hydrants, through our vehicles, to those structures, which is why we have 3 pumps here at Riverside. We've got 2 engines on our ladder truck, which all can pump water. And they look at those numbers in their scales to see what rating we would get. It was once asked if we got rid of an engine, would that affect our ISO rating? And it most definitely would. We are hoping one day to become ISO 1, which is the best you can get. We're not that far off right now, but if we did eliminate one of our pumps, we would probably go at least to an ISO 3, if not to an ISO 4, which would affect the insurance ratings for our residential and businesses in town. As far as our vehicles, what we carry is pretty much our 2 engines are set up the same way. They've got large diameter hose to supply water from a hydrant down the street to where the engine might be or where the fire might be. We've got our AMKIS rescue equipment, which is in the back of the vehicles when you open up the back doors. That's for doing auto extrication, as well as any other type of rescues where we might need that heavy equipment. We've got meters and monitors to look for gas leaks, CO leaks. We've also got different tools inside of there. It's basically a rolling toolbox. So pretty much anything we may need to deal with an emergency in town is right there at our ready to go, should it be needed. We've got fans in case we have a house with smoke in it. We can clear the smoke out quickly. We've got axes, obviously, pike poles to open up ceilings and walls. If a fire is behind the wall, we've got thermal imaging equipment, so we can actually, what they say, see through the walls to see if there is any heat or fire behind a wall instead of just opening a wall for no reason.
My assumption is all of this equipment is compatible to a new truck, so we wouldn't be leaving anything behind.
Correct. We have our self-contained breathing apparatus, our SCBAs, so we can breathe in smoke and heat environment. I should call my battalion chief. He rides the engine more than I do lately, but
We pretty much have, and we get a myriad of calls, as you can imagine. People call for everything. And we show up with all the tools and equipment to handle any one of those various calls. You know, we've had the fur vehicle cat stuck in a tree. Unless we want.
Come on up here with me.
So whatever we may need, we bring with us. You know, we don't want to have to go back to get the tools. That's why we show up as fast as we can, because we bring the stuff there. A myriad calls, monitoring for gas. You know, force one, you get locked out of your house, we have the tools to get you in your house, your car, you know, whatever it might be. We want to make sure we have the capacity on the rig to store all of our equipment.
Different size ground ladders and roof ladders, so if we do need to get up to windows to rescue somebody or get up to the roof to make a hole in the roof, that's on all our vehicles.
Takes a lot of equipment to handle all the calls that somebody might, we've been the handyman, we've been the, you know, the forcible entry, you know, car fires, you know. We have
Water rescue equipment.
Water rescue, cribbing to support cars when we're working on them, you know, so they don't roll onto somebody. All of it, it's contained to one rolling toolbox.
But just so I understand, all that's a lot, and
It is a lot.
that's a wonderful service to the village. But all of that is 1% of our calls. Where?
I don't know where that number.
I looked at the fire response calls, where you would have actual fire response.
Structure fire.
Structure fire. So obviously what you're
So
saying.
those calls are in addition to
Yeah.
what Joe is saying.
Right.
So you're telling me that truck is used for a lot more than just village fires?
Yes.
Building fires? It's
Correct.
used for everything?
It's used for the majority of calls.
Okay.
Because obviously, you know, 1%, the other 99%, it has to come off the same rig.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you. Thank you. Yes, Trustee Pollak.
These are always difficult questions and are difficult decisions when you're looking at replacing vehicles. As Trustee Evans referred to, we seem to have this conversation every year or so, whether it's replacing expensive fire trucks, police squad cars, or the family minivan. You never know when that last trip's going to be and where you're going to be when the thing conks out on you. I mean, we have an opportunity for using other people's money, so to speak, to pay for this. And I know I have total faith that we need to do it. So I agree with Trustee Hannan. I think we don't compromise when it comes to this type of expenditure.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't want to kick the can down the road on public safety. I think we have to make the purchase.
Okay. Anybody else?
I agree.
Okay. Thank you.
So the board was in consensus for using ARPA funding for the first phase of this. Is the board comfortable using IRMA funding for the second half,
For the second truck.
for the second trip?
That's the only money that we actually get interest on too, right?
Substantial interest, yes.
So, well, let me ask you the question, is it better to have a referendum at a 2% bond than it is to use IRMA money that we may be getting a higher interest rate for?
Manager Francis can also attest to this. The IRMA money is relatively new, and it is our money to use in capital and other things. So we can continue to build it up again, but I believe we started investing that money, please correct me if I'm wrong, but approximately 5 years ago.
It was a little longer than
Okay.
that. I was finance director, so when I became finance director, the Village of Riverside went to a higher deductible. And with that, we paid a lesser premium, and so therefore, previously, what the village had done is anytime IRMA would rebate dollars to the village, we would do it to essentially balance our budget. And so by changing our approach to our IRMA deductible, we actually started to bank those dollars. And so they've accumulated. I want to say it started in either 2013 or 2014, because 2013 was my first actual budget that I created. And so we continue to bank that. And so now we've accumulated over $1 million. So it's not necessarily that we need to make this decision this evening, but just getting guidance from the board if this is something that is something we want to evaluate. Some communities that continue to bank these monies with IRMA have created a policy that we don't want it to exceed X amount of dollars, and once it does exceed that point, we want some of it to be returned back to the village, whether it's to invest in vehicles, because long-term, while we're getting that additional multiplier in interest, does it make sense when we have equipment needs that need to be addressed? And so we can look at doing something like that if we have certain revenue shortfalls. Obviously, we have a little bit of time to have these types of discussions, and we can see how much more we accumulate over the next year or two. We'll know what we're getting from, if there is a surplus from IRMA within the next few months, because usually it's right in alignment with our fiscal year. But that was money that we did not have that was accumulated over time in addition to the surpluses that staff worked hard to accumulate during that same time. Sorry, that was very long-winded.
But if, on my back of the napkin math, which I know you do love when I do, we wouldn't have to take out all of IRMA's money in order to get that second pumper. We would only have to probably remove half.
No, and we could look at modifying the fund balance policy, and we have to look at best practices because we want to maintain our bond rating, obviously, but of how those monies are recognized under our fund balance and the availability of those funds. So in theory, we could not take that money out, still keep it banked, but if our cash levels go to a certain level, we could opt to withdraw that. IRMA has afforded over the years maximum flexibility to communities about when they need or want that money to be withdrawn. So we could look at kind of tackling this in a couple of different ways.
Okay. Then the other question is it more beneficial to allow that money to stay at IRMA and receive a higher interest rate and use bond money that we can get at 2%? Does it make more sense to issue bonds or a referendum at 2% to forward the truck than it is to take that money out? I don't know what the interest on that has been historically over the last 10 years.
It varies. So obviously it's subject to investments that they have, and they have quite the large portfolio with over 75 members. And so it really just depends on the market in a given year. So one year it could experience a slight loss, but then the following year they could recognize a 15% rate of return. So it fluctuates, but if you're looking at average and annualized, it's approximately right around 6 to 7%, which obviously is much better than we could ever do in CDs or any other type of investment vehicle that the village has available.
So I believe the answer to that question is it would be best for us to borrow the money than it would be to use that money.
It is, but we could look at, I think really the bottom line is looking at our financial policy. So because we do have other cash on hand when you're looking at our balance sheet, however, it's attributed to other sources. And so looking at how that's structured and figuring out what our maximum flexibility is so that we're not necessarily taking that money out of IRMA. So we can look at tackling it a couple of different ways, but I think having an understanding from the staff perspective that the board is open to that as kind of the last final action, then we can kind of come up with a strategy to address it then moving forward.
Okay. I think we're all comfortable, yell at me if I'm over speaking, that fire and safety is very important to all of us. And we have the utmost respect and staff that they don't come to us lightly for these types of things. So be flexible. So did I speak correctly? Okay. Got a couple thumbs and?
Yeah.
Okay. Move on.
Okay.
Before I get out of here.
Okay, so that's the last question that I had for the general CIP. Are there any questions the board had on that table or would like staff to go into further detail of any of them?
I have one question. What is the chances that we will be able to get any more money from Cook County out of that ARPA fund?
They're doing 2 rounds of calls for projects. So staff put together a somewhat lengthy request for round 1. Round 1 was projects that were basically shovel ready that we could implement within 6 to 9 months. Some of the things like actually speccing out a fire truck may take up to 12, but I tried to bundle those into that request. I believe there will be a second call for projects which will spend out the term of it, which are all ARPA funds need to be spent by year 2024. I can request those same items again when we get the second request for projects, or we could ask for water sewer projects as well. Water sewer infrastructure is an eligible expense for ARPA funds. So I have a long list that I will give to Cook County anytime they ask for it.
Both very important that we have. Thank you. Okay. Move on.
Okay. So with no other questions with that, I'd like to take you to the grant contingent table. These are the projects that at this point staff is only considering if we are able to get substantial grants for. The last EDC meeting, EDC discussed significant improvements to the train station, trying to make it easier for event space. So this project would include potentially redesigning the bathrooms and adding some extra electrical outlets. That's project number 1. There is a very large state grant out for recreational and tourism, where they will award up to $1 million. So that would be the grant that we would submit. That's the grant we would submit for.
Just give me 1 second. We do have train station electrical improvements in 2022. Is that in addition to the 125, or is that, see what I'm saying?
Oh yes, on facilities. That would be in addition to the 125. The 125 mainly focuses on the restrooms.
Okay. I'm sorry, go ahead.
The other option for the same grant is water tower maintenance. There was a lot of calls for kind of historic projects. So currently we have a study that has been done on the water tower that estimates $750,000 to help some of the moisture gathering in it, which causes the paint to peel in the interior. So this would be a long-term potential fix for that tower. My last idea for this same grant is historic campus improvements, which would be asking for the same roof that's on the south side of the tracks to be on the north side of the tracks, the clay shingles. Also potentially working on the well house attached to Fire Station 2. There's been talks in previous years about making that into a fire museum. So my first question is, since none of these projects are funded, does the board feel any of these projects takes priority over the funded projects which have previously been presented?
Over the funded projects like fire trucks and water and sewer?
No.
These are grant contingent, right?
That's what I'm clarifying. Right now, they're in grant contingent. I have zero funding for them. But if the board wanted to put them above anything else, that's always the board prerogative.
Wow, these are wonderful projects. As far as priority goes, I think that keeping them in the grant contingent category is a wise and prudent idea. I am very hopeful that the idea for the train station improvements, allowing ADA accessibility to the restrooms and upgrading electrical, I think, establishing that as a center for tourism is an excellent and very grant-worthy idea that will also help stimulate, the events that we put on here and the people that we were able to attract to our fair village.
Okay. So would the board like me to move forward and submit for these grants?
I would, yes.
Yes, please.
Sounds good.
The last table that I'd like to take you to is our unfunded table. And I do apologize, the train station improvements from the EDC was moved to the grant table, and I forgot to take it off this one. Some other items that had been in previous capital projects were economic incentive grants. In speaking with the EDC this year, they did not request those grants due to the fee waivers that the board approved a couple meetings ago. But I wanted to get board input before completely taking these out of the plans to see if the board would like me to put them in subsequent years.
What is the 26th trolley rehab?
Director Tab.
If you've ever driven down Des Plaines Avenue and 26th Street, there are two old trolley stops because the line used to run through there. A couple years ago, the 26th Street one's in pretty bad shape. It's got a lean to it, and a couple years ago, the previous director had partnered with FH Passion, their general contractor, to get a quote on to repair it, in essence. I believe it was brought to preservation. I think some of that information left with Director Apt when she moved on. But I believe it may, if the board was willing to entertain it, or spend the money on that, it would probably go back to preservation for further comment. But that was the price identified to repair that trolley stop. The one on Des Plaines Avenue is in pretty good shape. There has been previous discussion that I'm aware of possibly removing the one on 26th Street completely as opposed to redoing it.
It's the brown structure that you can sit under.
Mm-hmm.
You can sit.
It is.
Sit on, yeah.
Right.
Is that used for any, is there a bus
It's not
stop?
on a line.
It's not on a line?
No.
No, it's just purely,
Just-
okay.
I do see people sitting there on occasion at 26
Yeah,
and.
they utilize this, people
and
sit on them
Plains.
quite often, but it's not part of a transportation line.
As a former Preservation Commissioner, I can say that when the Preservation Commission discussed this, we were very hopeful that the village board would put out a plea to the community for some sort of a public-private partnership, some group to come in and restore it and have their name put on as, the general contractor who restored the, Toontown Trolley or whatever it's called. Or a scout group to come and do a project that would be undertaken in coordination with Public Works. So that would be one desirable outcome. Another would possibly be, we had asked Director Abt to reach out to the Railway Museum to see if they might be interested in acquiring the structure for one of their exhibits. So I don't know whatever happened with that, but that was something that was discussed at the time.
Currently on the unfunded list.
Thank you.
Guthrie Park Electric?
That's another item that's on this list. Previously that we talked about having electric in Guthrie Park, so we'd be able to power some of the larger concerts and things like that. Director Malchiotti can speak to this a little bit more if the board desires, but the power that we could get there won't be enough. We're still going to have to bring in an electric board, and it's not in the right real location for our current special event setups. So staff is not recommending this item, but before we took it off the list, we wanted to at least bring it to the board's attention.
Well, before you take it off the list, I did get a letter from the Legion, which I shared with the trustees looking for some input. One of the things that they had talked about was Guthrie Park electricity and their willingness to be part of that discussion. So we might want to reach out to them and see how willing, now that we have a number, they are to doing that.
Okay. The other items on the list, I'll just hit them real quickly, are gateway and wayfinding signage and gateway landscaping. These have been previously presented to the board. I believe the most recent wayfinding signage was by RB in the zoo. So if we wanted to extend that around town or any large gateway signage.
Wasn't there supposed to be one on Displays? Did we approve that like several years ago?
In 31st Street? Yeah.
Yeah, Foot Range, 31st and, 31st and Displays.
So there was discussion by the previous village board. And the direction was to also get feedback from EDC, and then EDC targeted certain locations, one being the one right by the high school and by the zoo. And so that's where it's stayed at this point in time. So if the board wants us to move forward with it, EDC has not listed, and Director Johns can correct me if I'm wrong, has not listed gateway signage as a priority for 2022. So that's one of the other reasons why it's listed as unfunded, based on the guidance that we received from that commission and feedback. And I think there was a little bit of conflict with, not conflict, but perhaps disagreement amongst different board members on whether or not that was the best use of village funds at that point in time. And so that's why it was phased with the high school / zoo location as being top priority.
If I remember correctly, you know, one thing about having these masks on, nobody could see the faces I'm making underneath it from time to time. I remember we talked about the signage actually including the name of businesses downtown. I vaguely remember that we were gonna have, the sign would say LaBarra Restaurant, straight ahead, Choo Choo, straight ahead, whatever.
I think that was floated informally, but because of also the requirements of the signage by IDOT, the sizes, we're very limited in how much we can put on some of these signs.
Okay. I was just trying to get, you know, public-private partnership to get this done. Okay. Thank you. Any input? We leave them on grant contingent or unfunded? I'm sorry.
Yep.
Okay.
The last item on the unfunded list is the building inspector vehicle. That does need replacement. However, the plan would be to roll down an SUV from the police department, which was on the previous general CIP list, to be shared between RTV and the building inspector. And then the building inspector vehicle would temporarily go to the water department for water meter changeouts and then be disposed of.
So, where would we see, so under the police vehicles, we see 128,000 in 2022?
Correct.
So unless if we,
That accounts for 2 vehicles.
and then one of those vehicles,
One of those vehicles will roll down to the building inspector vehicle, which is also shared with RTV. And based on RTV's larger equipment, an SUV would be better suited to them. I believe the other vehicle will also be rolled down. I'm sorry, I don't remember off the top of my head if that one was going to fire or
I believe we were
PW.
targeting for either roll down to either the fire department, and then the vehicle within the fire department would be repurposed short-term, looking at it being used for, once again, the water meter change-out, because we need a number of vehicles for personnel that's going to be going out and assisting with the water meter change-out program. And then any type of lost value that would occur, the water sewer fund would then reimburse the capital projects fund for whatever lost trade-in value, because it doesn't make sense for us to acquire vehicles for that 1 to 2 year period of time. And then whatever we would get for them would be then reimbursed to the capital projects fund.
okay, but maybe I just don't understand. If we're buying 2 police cars, and one of those police vehicles is gonna become the building inspector vehicle, why are we spending $30,000? Is that the cost of that? Is that the value of that?
That's why it's listed under unfunded. Because if we were to have purchased a new inspector vehicle, that would be the estimated cost to exchange like for like. However, we're not intending on doing that. So that vehicle will drop off, and it's always our target and our practice to evaluate vehicles. Can it be repurposed in another department and gain a little bit more life out of that vehicle? And so that's what we're doing with the police vehicles, is repurposing it and switching them over both to building/RTV and then for fire, and then taking those other 2 vehicles and repurposing them short-term for the water meter change-out. There's a strategy, I promise you.
Okay. Any questions for anyone, please, before we move on? No, we're good. Karen?
I've included the other tables that have been previously discussed, if there are any board questions on those. If not, this is the final CIP conversation. This will continue again and be presented in the annual budget conversations, and then any purchase over 20,000 will come back to the board for final approval.
I have one question about something I saw in the memos. About the electric vehicle charger stations.
Okay.
Is this something people have requested?
It was requested I believe 2 to 3 years ago, and it's been floated around with staff a couple times. We do have $10,000 a year of green initiative money through our franchise agreement, so that's what staff was planning on targeting the use of that funding for in 2022.
Do we know where we'd put it?
We've discussed parking lot 1, we've discussed parking lot 5, the police lot, and we've also discussed public works Public Works doesn't really work great because it's gated after certain hours.
But don't we already have everything out at, well, I don't know which parking lot it is, but the green parking lot that's in the business district? We have a pipe there, right? That's already ready to go. We just never facilitated it?
I'm not aware of that pipe. The cost in here would be associated with running power from the train station to Lot 1. The cost of the unit itself would be a lease agreement with the company. I apologize.
It's okay.
The $7,500 would cover the cost to run the power to the location where the charger would be, and that's an approximation until we get a quote. The intent would be to partner with a company that installs the system and then charges a monthly lease fee, which then would be recouped by charging the person for the power.
Okay, what is that pipe that's at the first green parking lot that says electricity with duct tape over the top? If I remember correctly, again, that was intended to be a charging station that actually never got finished.
We'll have to go look at that. I'm unaware of that pipe. Unless anybody, maybe other staff members are familiar with that pipe, I don't know.
Okay, because I'm all in favor of, as people drive electric cars, they need to get them charged, and it is a way for someone to come in and eat at our restaurants and charge their cars.
Yeah.
So I see it as an economic advantage, but I'd also like to see what's out there.
Sure, if the pipe's in place and it is, in essence, a piece of conduit running to the train station or a power source, it's even better. Then we don't have to cover the cost of necessarily installing it. I guess the discussion to be had would be, do we think it's worthwhile to place this station potentially with nobody using it? Because there is a lease fee that is, it's approximately $160 a month to cover the lease. It's a 2-port charger.
I have a question. Does this company that would be providing the unit, do they link your location to their satellite system? Because we have an electric vehicle and they have a find your charging station. So would we be
It's a larger
incorporated?
company. So they upload it to some of the mass market type websites that show you the locations.
Yeah, that would be excellent. I agree with you, Joe. It's a real driver for people, pun intended, right?
Because right now, I think the closest one is on Ogden Avenue in front of a bar there or something.
And maybe Lot 1 isn't the location we'd want to install. Maybe we would see some other location that might benefit more, so.
I would think in our CBD would be very beneficial. Lot 1 is the train station?
It's the paper brick lot west of the train station.
I would think that we'd want to keep it as close to our CBD as we can.
Agree.
Okay. So check and see what's sticking out of the ground over there. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I do have a couple of questions. We talked, and I don't know if this is necessarily the platform, but one of the things that to Ed's point, and to I think everyone's here, we all have these rain events are coming more frequently and heavier. There are things that we can do as a village, educating our residents or encouraging our residents to build rain gardens, and instead of putting in a blacktop driveway or cement driveway, put in a paver driveway or permeable surface. And we talked about, I kind of briefly said we would maybe want to waive fees for that. Is that this discussion, or is that something you want to wait till we talk budget time?
I believe that would be more of a budget decision because it wouldn't have a lifespan of over 5 years. But I will make sure that is a discussion point for our next meeting.
Great, thank you.
But it would be helpful if the board seems supportive of that, because I like to kind of get ahead of it, especially if I'm trying to put together a balanced budget. If the board is interested in doing that, then we can incorporate some sort of dollar amount year one, and see where that goes.
And I think you were saying you were going to take money from somewhere, and you were...
If it's a green initiative for permeable pavers or downspout disconnects, we discussed either offering a grant for it in our water sewer fund or waiving a permit fee and then really having the water sewer fund pay the general fund for that fee.
Is there any...
I think it's worth exploring.
Worth exploring?
Okay.
I'd like to take a look at it, yes.
And my public service announcement is I was delivered 2 brand-new rain barrels to my house for like $20 a piece. Delivered into my driveway from MWRD. So if anybody wants to disconnect their downspouts and get a rain barrel, I now have 4, and I use them all the time. I think we had a comment from one of the residents out in the hall. Can you see if Mr. Yates still would like to speak?
Now I'm exhausted, I can't say anything.
That was our goal.
You guys would wear anybody out, you know? I just have a few comments to make. Like I said, I made some comments earlier about my disappointment, per se, and the way certain items were handled. What of concern to me, because I do live on Groveland Avenue, are the sewers. There's no question about it. It's a big subject for me, and I know that it's a subject for you also. I know you're concerned about it, but I'd like to make it a priority to move forward on that sewer issue on Groveland Avenue, because my thinking is this. I don't believe in my heart of hearts that that wall is going to go up on the wall on Groveland. I mean, this thing's been going on for how many years now? 8, 10 years? We've been in the planning process. Nothing's happening. I mean, it's at a standstill. The choices of coming out with a design wall that everybody's going to be adhered to, I think, is going to be slim to none. Getting the approval of people down on West Street to put a wall up that could possibly be 10 feet tall on their property and getting those easements, that would be slim to none, too, in my book. So my proposal is this. You have a storm sewer there. Dan can vouch this off down Groveland Avenue. There is a storm sewer there. There originally was proposed in the plan with the flood wall to put a pump at the end of Groveland Avenue, I believe, near Park, because there is electricity there. There's a pole there. There's a place to discharge it into the, into the river, which they did when we had the floods down on the street, to get rid of the water. It's not the river that's the issue here in my book. It's the sewer system. It needs to be upgraded, but I think if nothing else, this might be some relief for the flooding I think will continue in Riverside in the following years, at least to relieve some issues, to take some of the water in that corridor, which is Groveland Avenue and Park Place, which would also probably relieve some issues on Lincoln and Kimbark. So I'm saying I think there has to be a positive approach and a movement toward taking care of what can be done now with funds, instead of going with, in my book, pie-in-the-sky dreams that everybody wants to have. Who doesn't want the vanity items? I'd like to see them too. I'd like to see a youth center. I'd like to see this. I'd like to see everybody in administration have a brand new office with lights and everything in it. Sure, who doesn't want that? But I don't think it's in the books. Where's the money going to come from? I see, when I go through villages, I see street improvements, I see people working on streets. I don't see anything here. I saw displays being paved this year. That I did see. That's it. So I'm asking you to probably please look at, what you have available in funding, and maybe shift gears on the infrastructure, and maybe move forward on using Groveland Avenue as kind of the stepping stone to improvements of the sewer system in Riverside. I'd also request that you also would send out a survey, a written survey, to the residents of Groveland and all the surrounding area that are affected by the flood wall issue, and get their comments verbally from them, At least that would give you some relief that you never heard from them, you never came and saw us and talked to us about the issues. So you know what the plan is, or what their thoughts are. And if they don't say anything, well, what can you do? You've done the best you can. But you did send a survey out, to find out about childcare and things like that for the rec department. I think the people on Groveland and the other surrounding areas affected by floodwaters, I think they deserve that too.
Thank you. We appreciate
So
your input.
any other issues, like I'm saying, I think we can all agree, like I say, that the flooding is an issue, and that we might have a plan. If you have a plan to do something like that, if Dan has a plan, that would be great. If somebody else has a plan, that would be great. But when I look at any information that I had, I see in road improvements on Groveland Avenue, I didn't see anything on Groveland till God knows when, past 2035 or whatever it might be, Karen, I'm not sure what the date would be. I didn't see anything. So that tells me you're not, even if you did something to put the wall up on Groveland Avenue with the Corps of Engineers, are you going to do the street too? Or are you going to do the street first and then, like Dan says, tearing up the street to put the sewer in? So I think you really have to look at the sewer issue more so than paving streets. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr.
You're all doing a
Yates.
great job.
Appreciate you coming tonight.
All right, thank you very much.
Next on the agenda is trustee reports and communications. Do I have anything? Trustee Marshaska?
I do. All right, so you've all heard me talk about the great excitement of the national celebration of Olmsted's 200th birthday next year. We have the distinct pleasure of the library hosting next Thursday at 7 p.m. a Zoom on the seeds of Riverside, creating an Olmsted 200 botanical box. This informative and photo-rich and video-rich Zoom presentation features Shailin Hora and Francisco Gonzalez of The Seed, and they will describe their process in constructing one of these incredible works of art that will be gifted to the library on Olmsted's 200th next year. In addition, on Sunday, the 19th of September, there will be a seed hunt featuring Scott Stewart of Millennium Park Foundation. Mr. Stewart also, or actually Dr. Stewart, also previously worked on Lurie Garden Design. He has a PhD in environmental horticulture and has published many papers on the evolving role of public parks and gardens. So he is kind of an ideal nature guide for the Olmsted 200 seed hunt that will be on the 19th. You can register for that through olmstedsociety.org. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I do.
Trustee Gallegos?
So there's two events I'd like to speak of. The first one is the 20th anniversary of September 11th. The American Legion Post 488 and the Riverside Township Lions Club are going to sponsor Music by the River. It'll take place about 1:30 in the afternoon on that Saturday, and we'll have the musicians of Matthew Sharp and Lou Leone performing. It'll be approximately 2 hours of music or so. That time was chosen so that our first responders will have time before and after their shifts to enjoy it. The public, however, is welcome to attend. Bring your blankets, bring your chairs. Tropical snow cones will be there. They will sell patriotic snow cones. Immediately following that will be a patriotic tribute on the river. That is going to take place immediately, and we'll have the accompanying music of Anderson Music School. The other event is the return of the Person of the Year. Last year, Peter Boutskakis from Riverside Foods was named as that recipient. We did not have the opportunity to celebrate a dinner in his honor. This year, we are going to have that event take place on September 23rd at the golf club. We will be following COVID guidelines, and as we get closer to the date, we will inform the public of what those guidelines will be. Tickets are $48. Cocktail attire is requested. And that's all I have for today.
Thank you, Trustee Gallegos. Since there is no need for an executive session, I would like to ask for a motion to adjourn in a second, if I could.
Motion made.
Second.
Trustee Gallegos, second by Trustee Marshowska. Kathy Haley, will you please call the roll?
Trustee Pollak.
Aye.
Trustee Marshowska.
Aye.
Trustee Gallegos.
Aye.
Trustee Hannan.
Aye.
Trustee Evans.
Aye.
Trustee Clarity.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. Have a good evening.
All right.